When the city slept, the streets above were silent, but beneath them, something dripped, not ominously, not urgently, just persistently, a slow rhythmic plop, like a bored drummer in a forgotten jazz band. Plop, plop, plop. Welcome to the sewers of ancient cities. Not the glamorous part of history. Not the part with kings and conquests. No, this is the part with moss, mystery, and mildly judgmental rats. You see, while emperors were busy being assassinated and philosophers were inventing ethics, the sewers were quietly doing their job, carrying away the evidence, the leftovers, the secrets, and sometimes the occasional sandal. Tonight, we begin our journey in a city so old, its name was lost to mildew. Its cobblestones were worn smooth by centuries of sandals, hooves, and one very confused tortoise. But beneath those stones lay a world few dared to explore, a world of tunnels, whispers, and the faint smell of yesterday's soup. The sewer workers, let's call them the pipe whisperers, were a peculiar bunch. They knew every twist and turn of the underground maze. They spoke in riddles. They wore cloaks made of damp linen and carried lanterns that flickered like nervous fireflies. One such worker, Old Marn, claimed he once met a ghost in Pipe 47B. Not a scary ghost, just a confused one. It had gotten lost on its way to the afterlife and ended up haunting a puddle near the drainage valve. Marn gave it directions and a sandwich. The ghost was grateful. Another worker, young Tillo, swore he heard music coming from the deepest tunnel. Not pipes clanging, not rats tap dancing. Real music. A lullaby echoing through the stone. He followed it once, but the tunnel looped back to the beginning. The music was gone. He blamed the rats. The rats blamed the acoustics. And then there was the legend of the sewer bell. They say, once every 100 years, a bell rings deep beneath the city. No one knows who rings it, or why. But when it does, every rat in the city pauses, just for a moment, as if remembering something ancient, something mildly important. Tonight, dear listener, we begin our descent, not into danger, not into drama, but into the oddly comforting hum of history's underbelly, a place where time drips slowly and secrets float gently by. So close your eyes. Let the cobblestones fade. The sewers are calling. And hey, before you drift off into dreams of ancient drains and mildly judgmental rats, do me a sleepy little favor. Like this video, if your eyelids are now heavier than a Roman aqueduct. Subscribe if you've ever wondered what a sewer ghost eats for lunch. Spoiler, it's soggy bread. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because nothing says global community like falling asleep to stories about ancient plumbing. When the city of Rome slept, it snored, loudly, the kind of snore that echoed off marble columns and startled pigeons into existential crises. But beneath the grandeur of the Roman Forum and the echoing snores of senators, another empire was hard at work, the sewer rats. Now don't picture the scruffy, villainous kind. These were Roman rats, refined, educated. Some wore togas. One had a tiny scroll. They were the engineers of the Cloaca Maxima, the great drain of Rome, and they took their job very seriously. Every night, as the city above slipped into dreams of conquest and olives, the rats convened in the damp council chamber beneath the Temple of Saturn. It was a cracked clay bowl, technically, but they called it a chamber. Prestige matters. Order, order, squeaked Consul Whiskarius. a rat of considerable girth and questionable hygiene. Tonight's agenda: the mysterious gurgling in Tunnel 3B and the unauthorized cheese stash behind the aqueduct. The rats debated. They drew diagrams in puddles. They gnawed respectfully. One rat proposed a new drainage system using hollowed-out snail shells. Another suggested simply yelling at the water until it behaved. Meanwhile, above ground, Rome's elite had no idea their waste was being managed by a rodent republic. Senators gave speeches. Gladiators fought. Poets rhymed. But down below, the real infrastructure was powered by tiny paws and big dreams. One rat, young Scribblus, had a vision. He wanted to build a sewer that sang. Literally, he believed that if water flowed over the right arrangement of pebbles, it would hum a lullaby. He tested it. It hummed. Then it flooded. Then it hummed again. Success was declared. But not all was peaceful in the underworld. There were rumors of a rogue rat, the dribbler, who sabotaged tunnels by chewing through support beams and leaving cryptic messages in droppings. The council was baffled. The messages were poetic. One simply read, "Moist is the soul that flows unseen." The rats were divided. Was the dribbler a menace or a misunderstood artist? Regardless, the Cloaca Maxima continued to flow. Rain, refuse, and the occasional sandal drifted through its ancient veins. And the rats, ever vigilant, kept the city clean. Ish. So next time you admire Roman architecture, remember, beneath every triumphal arch was a tunnel. Beneath every tunnel, a rat. And beneath every rat, probably another rat. Now, dear listener, as you drift into dreams of marble and moss, do me a sleepy little favor. Babylon, the city of hanging gardens, golden gates, and one very confused camel named Gerald. But beneath the splendor of ziggurats and the hum of ancient poetry, there was something else, something darker, wetter, slightly gloopier. The drain. Not a drain. The drain, the one that ran beneath the palace, beneath the temple, beneath the place where people accidentally dropped their clay tablets and pretended they didn't. It was called the whispering pipe by those who knew it, which was, basically, one guy. His name was Bubo, and he was Babylon's first and only sewer poet. Bubo believed that drains were the soul of the city. He wrote verses like, "O sludge, thou art my muse. In thee I lose my sandal and my blues." He recited them nightly to a crowd of mildly interested frogs. Now, Babylon's engineers were brilliant. They built canals, aqueducts, and one suspiciously large bathtub for a king who insisted on bathing in goat milk. But the drain? That was their secret masterpiece. It twisted like a serpent. It echoed like a gossip. And it had one very peculiar feature. It hummed. Not always, just when the moon was full, and the city had eaten too much lentil stew. The hum was low, like a sleepy bullfrog, with a philosophy degree. Some said it was the voice of the gods. Others said it was trapped wind. Bubo said it was poetry, trying to escape. One night, a priest dropped his ceremonial hat into the drain. It vanished. Days later, it reappeared in the marketplace, slightly soggy and inexplicably wearing a tiny crown. No one questioned it. Babylon was like that. There were rumors, too, of a chamber deep beneath the city where the drain widened into a pool where dreams gathered, where forgotten thoughts swirled, where one very old turtle named Nib-Nib claimed to have seen the future. Nib-Nib was not a reliable source. Still, the drain remained, quiet, patient, occasionally burping. And when Babylon fell, when its towers crumbled and its gardens wilted, the drain kept flowing, carrying away the dust of empires, the echoes of laughter, the last lentil stew. When Athens slept, it dreamed in marble. Above ground, philosophers snored in iambic pentameter. Statues glowed in the moonlight. Olive trees whispered secrets to the breeze. But below all that, beneath the columns, beneath the sandals, beneath the democracy, something else stirred. Moss and murmurs. The Athenian sewers weren't as grand as Rome's, nor as mysterious as Babylon's, but they had character. They were narrow, winding, and slightly judgmental. If you dropped something in them, they didn't give it back. They kept it, for reasons. The Athenians, being thinkers, had theories. Some said the sewers were alive, that they remembered every speech, every spilled wine cup, every dramatic exit from a symposium, that deep in the tunnels, the echoes of Socrates' last words still bounced around, occasionally bumping into a confused frog. Others believed the moss was sentient. It grew only in certain places. It avoided bad poetry. It hummed when it rained. One man claimed it corrected his philosophical arguments by rearranging itself into passive-aggressive shapes. He was ignored by everyone, including the moss. Now, the sewer workers of Athens were a peculiar breed. They called themselves hydrosophists. They wore sandals with extra grip and carried scrolls waterproofed with goat wax. Their leader, a man named Kleptocles, insisted the sewers were the true agora, the real place of debate. Water, he said, is the original philosopher. It flows, it adapts, and it never pays taxes. He was very unpopular at parties. One night, Kleptocles claimed he heard a voice in the drain. Not a rat, not a ghost, a voice. It said, "The answer is under the moss." Naturally, he spent the next 3 weeks scraping moss off every surface in the sewer. He found a spoon, a lost sandal, and a very old olive. No answers. But he did invent the first sewer-based salad. Meanwhile, the city above debated ethics, justice, and whether to wear tunics with or without belts. Below, the moss grew, the murmurs continued, and the frogs held their own quiet symposiums, mostly about flies and puddle rights. When Egypt slept, the Nile whispered. Above ground, pyramids glowed under moonlight. Priests mumbled in hieroglyphics. Cats judged everyone. But beneath the sand, beneath the temples, tombs, and one very confused ibis, something else slithered. A pipe, not a royal pipe, not a ceremonial pipe, just a pipe. Long, damp, slightly sarcastic. It ran beneath the palace of Pharaoh Pepi, the mildly enthusiastic. He wasn't famous. He wasn't dramatic. He once declared war on excessive humidity and lost. But he did love plumbing. Pepi believed the Nile had secrets, that its waters whispered wisdom. So he ordered a pipe, built beneath his throne. Not for drainage, for listening. Every night, he sat on his throne, tilted his head, and said, "Speak, O soggy serpent." The pipe gurgled. Sometimes it burped. Once it sneezed. Pepi took notes. Now, the royal plumbers were a curious bunch. They wore linen tool belts and carried reeds for measuring puddle depth. Their leader, Sudi, claimed the pipe had moods. Happy pipes flowed smoothly. Sad pipes dripped slowly. Angry pipes spat frogs. One night, the pipe sang, not loudly, just a soft hum, like a sleepy crocodile humming a lullaby. Pepi was thrilled. He declared it a divine message. The priests disagreed. The crocodile nodded. There were rumors, too, of a chamber deep beneath the palace where the pipe widened into a pool where dreams gathered, where forgotten sandals floated, where one very ambitious crocodile named Nefertubby practiced synchronized swimming. Nefertubby was not officially recognized by the priesthood, but he had fans. Meanwhile, the pipe continued its quiet work, carrying water, secrets, and the occasional papyrus scroll someone dropped during a dramatic exit. It never complained. It never leaked. Except on Thursdays. Delphi, the sacred navel of the ancient world, a place where gods whispered, priests nodded wisely, and tourists from 500 BCE asked for directions using interpretive dance. Above ground, the oracle spoke in riddles. Below ground, the sewer did too. It was known as the Pipe of Prophecy. Not officially. That was just what one very imaginative plumber named Thrax called it. Thrax believed the sewer beneath the Temple of Apollo held divine secrets, mostly because it burped every time someone asked a yes or no question. Will I find love? Burp. Should I invest in amphora futures? Gurgle. Is this rash normal? Splash. Thrax kept a journal. It was damp and smelled faintly of olives, but it was filled with sewer prophecies. He claimed the water flow predicted weather, politics, and the outcome of goat races. He was banned from 3 temples and 1 goat track. Now, the sewer itself was peculiar. It twisted beneath Delphi like a lazy snake. It had alcoves where moss grew in the shape of question marks. It echoed in ways that made even confident philosophers second-guess their life choices. And deep within its darkest bend was a puddle known as the reflecting pool. Not because it showed your reflection, no, because it judged you. Stand over it, and it would bubble if you were lying. One priest tried to test it by saying, "I am humble." The puddle erupted. He was reassigned to goat maintenance. There were stories, too, of a rat named Pythia Jr., who lived beneath the temple and squeaked in cryptic patterns. Some believed she was the reincarnation of the original oracle. Others believed she was just cold and wanted a blanket. One night, Thrax claimed he saw a vision in the sewer mist. A glowing amphora, a floating sandal, a frog wearing a laurel wreath. He interpreted it as a sign to open a sewer-themed bakery. It failed, but the frog became mayor of a puddle. Still, the pipe of prophecy remained. Quiet, damp, occasionally judgmental, and when the oracle above spoke, the sewer below hummed in agreement or burped in protest. Pompeii, the city of ash, art, and one very judgmental parrot named Flavius. By day, it bustled. Merchants shouted, gladiators flexed, bakers baked things that were technically bread. But by night, when the city slept and the volcano politely held its breath, something else stirred. The night plumbers. They weren't official. They weren't invited. They just showed up, cloaked in damp tunics and armed with ladles. They wandered the sewers beneath Pompeii like soggy philosophers. Their leader, a man named Glorpus, believed plumbing was sacred. Water, he said, is the city's memory, and sometimes it forgets to flush. Glorpus had a map, not a normal map. It was drawn on a piece of goat leather and smelled faintly of regret. It showed every twist and turn of Pompeii's underground pipes, including one labeled, "Do not enter, unless you're feeling brave or mildly reckless." Naturally, they entered it nightly. The tunnel was warm, steamy. It hissed like a sleepy snake with indigestion. And at its end was a puddle. Not just any puddle, a dramatic puddle It reflected your deepest fears, your worst fashion choices, your most questionable dinner orders. One plumber stared into it and saw himself ordering anchovy gelato. He wept. There were legends, too, of a pipe that led directly to the volcano's heart, of steam that whispered secrets, of a rat named Vesuvius Jr., who wore a tiny helmet and claimed to be the city's emergency manager. Vesuvius Jr. was not taken seriously, but he had a clipboard. One night, the plumbers heard music, not from above, from below, a soft, bubbling tune, like a lullaby sung by a geyser. They followed it. It led to a chamber filled with steam, moss, and one very confused lizard doing interpretive dance. Glorpus declared it a sacred site. The others declared it slippery, but inspiring. Meanwhile, the city above slept, unaware of the steamy symphony below, unaware of the plumbers who whispered to pipes and debated puddle ethics, unaware that their drains were being serenaded nightly by steam and ladles. Knossos, the palace of legends, home to kings, minotaurs, and one very dramatic fresco of a man doing yoga on a bull. Above ground, the Minoans danced, feasted, and invented indoor plumbing just to show off. But beneath the palace, beneath the mosaic floors and ceremonial goat masks, lay a labyrinth. Not the famous one. That was upstairs. This was the other labyrinth. The one no one talked about. The one filled with pipes, puddles, and one very confused minotaur-sized leak. It was called the Drip Maze. Not officially. That was just what a retired labyrinth tour guide named Spiros called it. Spiros believed the maze beneath Knossos was alive, not in a spooky way. More in a, I think it just sighed kind of way. The maze twisted. It turned. It looped back on itself, like a bored snake trying to tie a knot. And at its center was a puddle, shaped like a question mark. It shimmered. It smelled faintly of feta. It judged you. Now, the sewer keepers of Knossos were known as pipe navigators. They wore sandals with built-in compasses and carried scrolls that unfolded into maps, riddles, and one recipe for boiled moss. Their leader, Ariadne the Damp, claimed she could hear the pipes whisper. Left, they said. Now right. Now spin in a circle and question your choices. One night, Ariadne followed a particularly dramatic leak. It gushed. It glowed. It made a sound like a minotaur, sighing in existential dread. She followed it into a chamber filled with steam, moss, and one very old rat wearing a crown made of breadcrumbs. The rat spoke, not in words, in squeaks, but Ariadne understood. It said, "The maze remembers." She nodded, mostly because she didn't want to offend a royal rat. There were rumors, too, of a pipe that led to the original labyrinth, of echoes that sounded like ancient footsteps, of puddles that rearranged themselves into ancient symbols. One puddle spelled hello, another spelled send snacks. Meanwhile, the palace above hosted feasts, dances, and one very confusing play about olives. Below, the maze dripped. It hummed, it judged sandals, and it waited. Jerusalem, a city of stone, spirit, and sandals, with surprisingly good arch support. Above ground, prayers floated through the air like incense. Lanterns flickered. Cats patrolled rooftops with divine indifference. But beneath the ancient stones, beneath the temples, the wells, and one very lost goat, there was a drip, not a leak, a prophecy. The sewers of Jerusalem were old, older than most arguments. They wound beneath the city like forgotten thoughts, And in one particular tunnel, narrow, damp, and shaped like a question mark, there lived a drip. It had no name, no schedule. It simply dripped, plop, always in the same spot, always at the same time, just after midnight. Locals called it the prophet's droplet. Some said it was holy. Others said it was just condensation. One man claimed it predicted the weather. He was wrong, but very confident. Now, the sewer keepers of Jerusalem were a quiet bunch. They wore robes with extra pockets and carried scrolls that smelled faintly of pickles. Their leader, Eliyahu the Moist, believed the drip was divine. He listened to it nightly, took notes. Sometimes he asked it questions. Will peace come? Plop. Should I invest in lentil futures? Plop. Did I leave the oven on? Plop. He took that last one as a yes. He was right. There were stories, too, of a chamber beneath the old city where the walls wept. Not metaphorically, literally. Tiny beads of water formed words, mostly gibberish, occasionally coupons. Once, a perfect haiku about hummus. One night, Eliyahu followed the drip, not just the sound, but the feeling. It led him to a hidden alcove. Inside was a puddle, shaped like a menorah. It shimmered, it hummed. It smelled faintly of olives and mystery. He sat beside it, listened, waited. The drip fell, plop, and in that moment, he understood. Absolutely nothing. But he felt better, calmer, like the city had exhaled. Carthage, the jewel of North Africa, a city of trade, triumph, and one very ambitious pigeon named Tuni. Above ground, ships docked, merchants haggled, and generals plotted things involving elephants. But beneath the bustling streets, beneath the markets, the mosaics, and one suspiciously slippery statue, there was a sewer, and it had a grudge. They called it the Grumbler. Not officially. That was just what a retired fishmonger named Balthus called it. Balthus believed the sewer beneath Carthage was sentient, not in a spooky way, more in a I think it just rolled its eyes kind of way. The Grumbler was old, twisty, moody. It gurgled when insulted. It burped when praised. And once, it flooded an entire alley because someone called it adequate. Now, the sewer workers of Carthage were known as drain diplomats. They wore waterproof robes and carried scrolls sealed in fish oil. Their leader, a woman named Salma the Soggy, believed the sewer had feelings. She spoke to it nightly. "Hello, old friend," she'd whisper. "Feeling drippy?" The sewer responded with a gentle splash. Sometimes it sent up a bubble. Once, it launched a sandal. Salma took that as a compliment. There were rumors, too, of a chamber deep beneath the city where the water swirled in mysterious patterns. Some said it was a portal. Others said it was just very enthusiastic plumbing. One rat claimed it led to Atlantis. He was ignored, but he wore a monocle. Then came the day the sewer snapped. It started with a gurgle, then a rumble, then a dramatic splash that soaked 3 senators and a goat. The city panicked. The Grumbler had spoken, and it was not pleased. Salma descended into the depths. She brought offerings, olive oil, a poem, and a very polite sponge. She found the chamber. It was glowing, bubbling, slightly sarcastic. She whispered, "We hear you." The sewer burped. Then it calmed. Carthage was saved. For now, Kyoto, a city of lanterns, whispers, and one very contemplative koi named Nobu. Above ground, the night was quiet. Bamboo rustled. Temples exhaled incense. Monks tiptoed like polite shadows. But beneath the stillness, beneath the gardens, the tatami mats, and one misplaced sandal, there was movement. A flush, not loud, not rude, just purposeful, like a bow, like a sigh, like a pipe remembering its duty. The sewers of feudal Kyoto were elegant, not grand, not boastful, just quietly brilliant. They curved like calligraphy, they echoed like poetry, and they were maintained by a secret guild, known only as the Gentle Plumbers. They wore robes stitched with water symbols. They carried ladles carved from cherry wood. Their leader, Master Sento, believed plumbing was a form of meditation. Every drip, he said, is a thought. Every flush, a release. He spoke softly, even to the pipes. Now, Kyoto's underground was more than just tunnels. It was a philosophy, a place where water flowed with intention, where puddles formed in perfect circles, where frogs croaked in haiku. One night, Master Sento discovered a chamber beneath the old tea house. It was silent, still, and in the center floated Nobu, the koi. Nobu had escaped from a garden pond years ago and somehow found his way into the sewer. But he didn't panic. He adapted. He meditated. He became the unofficial guardian of the midnight flush. Every night, as the city slept, Nobu swam in circles, slow, thoughtful, and the pipes flushed gently as if bowing to him. There were rumors, too, of a pipe that led to enlightenment, of steam that whispered ancient wisdom, of a puddle that once corrected a monk's posture. The monk was grateful. His back stopped clicking. Master Sento believed the sewer was sacred, that beneath the city's silence was a symphony of flow, that every flush was a prayer, that every drip was a reminder to let go. Scandinavia, land of fjords, feasts, and one very confused barrel named Bjorn. Above ground, Viking warriors sharpened axes, toasted mead, and occasionally yelled at clouds. But beneath the longhouses, beneath the snow-packed streets, and one suspiciously slippery reindeer, there was a problem, a drain dilemma. You see, Vikings weren't known for their plumbing. They were known for their boats, their beards, and their ability to shout in 3 languages. But even they had sewers. Sort of. More like strategically placed holes with ambition. One such hole was beneath the village of Sogvik. It was deep, damp, and it had opinions. The villagers called it the Grumble Hole. Not officially. That was just what a retired shield polisher named Ingrid called it. Ingrid believed the drain was cursed. Not in a spooky way. More in a, it keeps returning my socks kind of way. Now, the Viking plumbers, yes, they existed, were known as pipe raiders. They wore fur-lined tool belts and carried ladles carved from dragon-shaped driftwood. Their leader, Olaf the Moist, believed the drain was misunderstood. It's not angry, he said. It's just cold and dramatic. One winter, the drain froze. Solid. The village panicked. Mead couldn't drain. Snow couldn't melt. One goat refused to move until the issue was resolved. Olaf descended into the depths. He brought offerings, warm soup, a poem about puddles, and a very polite barrel named Bjorn. Bjorn was meant to collect the overflow. Instead, he rolled away and became mayor of a snowbank. In the deepest tunnel, Olaf found the source of the dilemma, a frozen puddle shaped like a Viking helmet. It shimmered, it hummed, it smelled faintly of pickled herring. He whispered, "We hear you." The puddle cracked, the drain sighed, and slowly, the water flowed again. There were rumors, too, of a pipe that led to Valhalla's laundry room, of steam that smelled like victory. of a rat named Ragnar Jr., who wore a tiny horned helmet and claimed to be descended from Odin's mop. Ragnar Jr. was not taken seriously, but he had a fan club, Paris, the city of light, love, and one very philosophical rat named Pierre. But long before the Eiffel Tower, before croissants became currency, and before pigeons learned passive aggression, Paris was a medieval maze of stone, shadows, and secrets, and beneath it all, beneath the cobbled streets, the cathedrals, and one very confused goose, there was a sewer, and in that sewer, monks. Not ordinary monks. These were the Order of the Dripping Silence. They wore robes stitched from damp linen and carried candles that flickered like shy fireflies. Their vow? To listen. To the water. To the echoes. To the wisdom of the waste. Their leader, Brother Lucien the Moist, believed the sewer was divine. God, he whispered, moves in mysterious puddles. Every night, the monks descended into the depths. They walked slowly. They hummed softly. They greeted every rat with a bow. Pierre, the philosophical rat, often joined them. He wore a tiny hood and once wrote a treatise titled On the Nature of Cheese and Regret. Now, the Parisian sewer was a marvel. It curved like a question. It dripped like a thought. And in one chamber, round, quiet, and faintly scented with old soup, the monks meditated. They called it the Chamber of Reflection, not because of mirrors, because of puddles. The puddles reflected your soul, or your lunch, depending on the lighting. One monk stared into a puddle and saw his childhood. Another saw a duck. Brother Lucien saw a baguette and took it as a sign to bake more. There were legends, too, of a pipe that led to forgotten prayers, of steam that whispered Latin, of a puddle that once corrected a monk's grammar. The monk was grateful. His sermons improved. And then there was the great silence. Once a year, the sewer stopped dripping. Just for a moment. The monks gathered. They listened. They wept. Not out of sadness, out of awe. Even Pierre shed a tear, then ate it. He was poetic like that. Istanbul, once Constantinople, a city of domes, dreams, and one very competitive puddle named Murat. Above ground, the Ottoman Empire thrived. Sultans sipped tea. Scholars debated stars. Carpets were woven with such precision they made mathematicians weep. But beneath the palaces, the bazaars, and one very confused cat in a fez, there was a game, a pipe game. You see, the Ottomans didn't just build sewers, they designed them, curved like calligraphy, whispered like poetry, and in one particularly elegant tunnel, beneath Topkapi Palace, the pipes played. Not music, not tricks, a game. It was called Sous Strategies, the water strategy, invented by a bored architect named Halim, who once tried to build a fountain shaped like a falcon doing taxes. It was vetoed, but his sewer game, that stayed. The rules were simple. Guide the water through a maze of valves, levers, and tiny ceramic ducts. The goal? To reach the grand drain without waking the puddle. The puddle's name was Murat. It wasn't official. That's just what a retired janissary named Kemal called it. Murat was temperamental. If the water arrived too fast, he'd splash. Too slow, he'd sulk. Just right, he'd hum. The palace plumbers became obsessed. They trained. They strategized. They wore robes with embroidered pipe diagrams and carried ladles like scepters. Their leader, Fatma, the flowmaster, claimed she once beat Murat in under 3 drips. She was legendary. There were tournaments, secret ones. held at midnight, lit by lanterns, judged by cats. The winner received a golden sponge. The loser had to clean the Sultan's bathhouse with a spoon. One night, a mysterious challenger appeared, cloaked, silent, smelled faintly of mint and mystery. They played Murat. The water flowed. The valves clicked. The ducks quacked in approval. Murat hummed, "Victory." The challenger bowed, dropped a single fig into the drain, and vanished. Some say it was Halim's ghost. Others say it was just a very focused librarian. Regardless, the game continued. The pipes flowed. The puddle judged. And the city above never knew that beneath its feet, strategy and steam danced nightly. Prague, a city of spires, spells, and one very experimental puddle named Ludek. Above ground, alchemists stirred potions. Astronomers squinted at stars. Clockmakers argued with time itself. But beneath the cobbled streets, beneath the castles, the cathedrals, and one very confused raven, there was a drain. And it was curious. They called it the philosopher's pipe. Not officially. That was just what a retired bell ringer named Thomas called it. Thomas believed the drain beneath Prague's old town was magical. Not in a flashy way. More in a, it just turned my spoon into a metaphor kind of way. The pipe was old, twisted, lined with symbols no one could read, but everyone pretended to understand. It dripped in Morse code. It burped in Latin. It once hummed the opening bars of a forgotten lullaby. Now, the alchemists of Prague were a peculiar bunch. They wore robes dusted with powdered gold and carried flasks that smelled like ambition. Their leader, Susanna the Bubbling, believed the drain was a portal. Not to another world, she said. To another idea. She poured potions into it nightly, carefully, respectfully. Once, she added a drop of moonlight. The pipe giggled. Ludek, the puddle, shimmered and briefly turned into a tiny mirror that showed your most recent mistake. One man saw himself ordering garlic ice cream. He wept. There were rumors, too, of a chamber beneath the Charles Bridge, where the water flowed in spirals, where steam formed equations, where rats wore monocles and debated ethics. One rat, named Desratus, published a pamphlet titled, "I Drip, Therefore I Am." It was banned, then celebrated, then banned again. One night, Susanna followed a trail of glowing droplets. They led to a vault. Inside, a puddle shaped like a question mark. It pulsed. It whispered. It smelled faintly of copper and curiosity. She asked, "What is the secret?" The puddle replied, 42. She nodded. It was the wrong answer, but it felt right. Meanwhile, the city above ticked and talked. Below, the drain dreamed. It processed potions, pondered puddles, and occasionally turned socks into philosophical statements. London, a city of fog, flare, and one very wistful pipe named Winifred. Above ground, lamplighters flickered through the mist. Poets scribbled in cafes. Horses clip-clopped with dramatic flair. But beneath the cobblestones, beneath the chimneys, the chapels, and one very confused umbrella, there was a sewer. And it dreamed. Not of fame, not of fortune, just of being understood. They called it Winifred, not officially. That was just what a retired chimney sweep named Elsie called it. Elsie believed the sewer beneath Fleet Street had feelings, not in a spooky way, more in a it sighed when she read poetry kind of way. Winifred was old, Victorian, lined with bricks that remembered every footstep. It dripped in couplets. It burped in metaphors. It once flooded a cellar in perfect iambic pentameter. Now, the sewer workers of London were known as the fog plumbers. They wore coats with extra pockets for tea bags and carried ladles engraved with Shakespearean insults. Their leader, Reginald the Damp, believed Winifred was lonely. She wants to be heard, he said. She wants someone to notice her puddles. One night, Reginald brought a phonograph into the tunnel. He played a recording of Virginia Woolf, reading softly. Winifred responded with a gentle gurgle and a puddle shaped like a semicolon. There were rumors, too, of a chamber beneath Westminster where the water echoed like sonnets, where steam formed silhouettes of forgotten lovers, where rats wore monocles and debated Dickens. One rat, named Pip, claimed to be the reincarnation of a misunderstood metaphor. Pip was respected. He had a book club. Elsie returned often. She read aloud. Winifred listened. Sometimes she wept. Sometimes she hummed. Once, she rearranged her puddles into the word longing. Elsie nodded. She understood. Meanwhile, the city above bustled. Below, Winifred dreamed. Of fog, of footsteps, of someone who might one day write a poem just for her. Lahore, a city of gardens, grandeur, and one very poetic droplet named Rumi. Above ground, the Mughal Empire flourished. Courtyards bloomed. Poets recited verses that made pigeons swoon. Scribes inked scrolls with such elegance, even the ink blushed. But beneath the marble fountains, beneath the minarets, the mango trees, and one very confused peacock, there were wells. And they whispered, not loudly, not urgently, just gently, like a breeze reciting a ghazal. They were called the Wells of Reflection, not officially. That was just what a retired calligrapher named Parveen called them. Parveen believed the wells beneath Lahore's Shalimar Gardens held memories, not in a spooky way, more in a they remember your favorite verse kind of way. The wells were deep, cool, lined with tiles that shimmered like forgotten dreams. They dripped in couplets. They echoed in metaphors. One well once recited a poem about mangoes and heartbreak. It won an award from a frog. Now, the water keepers of Lahore were known as the verse carriers. They wore robes stitched with poetry and carried ladles carved from sandalwood. Their leader, Hafiz the Humble, believed the wells were sacred listeners. Speak, he said, and they will answer, not in words, in rhythm. One night, Hafiz descended into the deepest well. He brought offerings, rose petals, a verse about longing, and one very polite droplet named Rumi. Rumi had been dripping from the same stone for 87 years. He was wise. He was patient. He once corrected a poet's meter with a splash. There were rumors, too, of a chamber beneath Badshahi Mosque, where the water hummed in rag, where steam formed verses, where rats wore tiny turbans and debated Sufi philosophy. One rat, named Bola Jr., claimed to have written a couplet that made a puddle cry. It was beautiful and slightly damp. Hafiz listened. The well whispered. It spoke of love, loss, and the importance of proper drainage. He wept, not out of sadness, out of connection. Even the peacock nodded. Meanwhile, the city above glowed. Below, the wells whispered. They remembered every verse, every sigh, every mango. Machu Picchu, the city in the clouds, a place of stone, silence, and one very punctual llama named Ernesto. Above ground, the Inca citadel stood proud. Terraces hugged the mountainside. Temples whispered to the sun. Tourists gasped dramatically. But beneath the moss-covered stones, beneath the sacred plazas, the sundials, and one very confused guinea pig, there was a flush, a forgotten flush. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, it was ceremonial, a single, sacred release of water that once marked the changing of seasons, the arrival of rain, or the end of a particularly intense potato harvest. They called it the Whispering Wash. Not officially. That was just what a retired alpaca groomer named Tika called it. Tika believed the flush beneath Machu Picchu was spiritual, not in a spooky way, more in a it burped when the moon was full kind of way. The Inca engineers were brilliant. They carved channels with precision. They guided water like poets, guide metaphors, and in one hidden tunnel, narrow, mossy, and shaped like a question mark, the flush waited. It hadn't flushed in centuries. Now, the water keepers of Machu Picchu were known as the Flow Guardians. They wore robes dyed with river stones and carried ladles carved from ancient eucalyptus. Their leader, Amaru the Gentle, believed the flush was a message. Not from the gods, he said, from the mountain itself. One misty morning, Amaru followed a trail of damp moss. It led to a chamber beneath the temple of the condor. Inside, a stone basin, empty, silent, and one puddle shaped like a spiral. He whispered, "Are you still here?" The puddle shimmered. The flush flushed. It was soft. It was slow. It smelled faintly of ancient potatoes and possibility. There were rumors, too, of a pipe that led to the stars, of steam that hummed in Quechua, of a rat named Pachacuti Jr., who wore a tiny feathered headdress and claimed to be the reincarnation of a water priest. Pachacuti Jr. was respected. He had a ceremonial puddle. Meanwhile, the city above basked in sunlight. Below, the flush flowed. It remembered every ritual, every rain, every llama. Samarkand, the silk-laced jewel of the Silk Road. A city of domes, stars, and one very musical pigeon named Zafar. Above ground, minarets shimmered in the sun. Traders bartered in 7 languages. Poets recited verses that made camels pause in admiration. But beneath the turquoise tiles, beneath the bazaars, the madrasas, and one very confused lute, there was a sewer, and it sang, not loudly, not for applause, just softly, like a lullaby hummed by the earth itself. They called it the Melody Drain. Not officially. That was just what a retired spice merchant named Anara called it. Anara believed the sewer beneath Registan Square held music, not in a spooky way, more in a it harmonized with your footsteps kind of way. The drain was ancient, woven through the city like a forgotten melody. It echoed in maqams. It burbled in rhythm. It once whistled a tune that matched the call to prayer. Coincidence? Perhaps. Beautiful. Always. Now, the water keepers of Samarkand were known as the Echo Tenders. They wore robes stitched with musical notes and carried ladles that doubled as flutes. Their leader, Daler the Tuneful, believed the sewer was a composer. Every drop, he said, is a note. Every puddle, a pause. One twilight, Daler followed a trail of humming condensation. It led to a chamber beneath the Ulugh Beg Observatory. Inside, a pool shaped like a treble clef. It shimmered. It pulsed. It smelled faintly of rose water and rhythm. He knelt. He listened. The sewer sang. A melody of wind, water, and memory. Of caravans and constellations. Of spices and silence. Even Zafar the pigeon cooed in harmony. There were rumors, too, of a tunnel that led to a forgotten music school. of steam that whispered lullabies, of a rat named Rumi Jr., who wore a tiny vest and conducted puddle symphonies with a cinnamon stick. Rumi Jr. was beloved. He had a fan base and a tiny tambourine. Meanwhile, the city above danced in moonlight. Below, the sewer sang. It remembered every song, every sigh, every silent verse. Byzantium, the city of mosaics, mystery, and one very contemplative cat named Theodora. Above ground, the Hagia Sophia shimmered in candlelight. Scholars debated theology over figs. Bells chimed like thoughtful sighs. But beneath the marble arches, beneath the cisterns, the chapels, and one very confused sandal, there was a pipe, the final pipe. It wasn't grand. It wasn't golden. It was tired. A pipe that had seen empires rise and fall, that had carried whispers, wishes, and the occasional spoon. It was known as the last flow. Not officially, that was just what a retired mosaic cleaner named Nikos called it. Nikos believed the pipe beneath Byzantium was ancient beyond measure, not in a spooky way, more in a it remembers your grandmother's favorite lullaby kind of way. The pipe didn't drip. It sighed. Now, the caretakers of the Byzantine underworld were known as the Quiet Keepers. They wore robes stitched with faded stars and carried ladles carved from forgotten prayers. Their leader, Helena the Gentle, believed the pipe was ready to rest. It's done its duty, she said. It's carried the weight of centuries. Let it sleep. One twilight, Helena descended into the depths. She brought offerings, a candle, a poem, and one very sleepy cat named Theodora. The pipe hummed, the candle flickered, the cat purred. There were rumors, too, of a chamber beneath the basilica cistern, where the water glowed softly, where echoes told stories, where rats wore tiny cloaks and recited bedtime tales. One rat, named Constantine Jr., claimed to have invented the concept of naps. He was honored. With a pillow, Helena reached the final bend. The pipe shimmered. It released one last drop. It landed in a puddle, shaped like a crescent moon. The pipe sighed. The city above exhaled. And then, silence. Not empty, not sad, just peaceful. The pipe had sung its last song, told its last tale, carried its last dream. Thank you for traveling through tunnels and time with me, from Rome to Samarkand, from puddles to poetry. You've wandered the world beneath the world. Now close your eyes. Let the pipes rest. Let the water whisper, and let the dreams begin. Good night.